Welcome to Purpose of Heart, the podcast, where real stories meet God's promises. I'm Priscilla Allman, and every week we dive into powerful conversations about purpose in the pressure through caregiving, illness, grief, addiction, and more. If you've ever asked, God, where are you in this? You're in the right place. Be sure to follow the show, and let's find purpose together. Hello, and welcome back to Purpose of Heart, the podcast. I'm your host, Priscilla Allman, and today we're going to be talking about a conversation that can challenge us, but it's a really important one. Today we're talking about this: choosing obedience over outcome. Because if we're honest, most of us don't struggle with hearing what God is asking. We struggle with what comes after. We struggle with questions like, well, what will happen if I do this? What if it doesn't work out? What if I step out and nothing changes? And without even realizing it, we begin to measure obedience by results. But God never asked us to be responsible for the outcome. He asked us to be faithful in each step. There's real tension that comes with obedience, because obedience often requires you to move without having the full picture. It asks you to trust when things don't make sense, to step forward when the outcome is still uncertain. And that can feel uncomfortable, especially if you're someone who likes clarity, planning, and control. But here's the truth: faith and control cannot lead at the same time. At some point, you kind of have to decide, am I going to trust what I see, or trust the one who sees everything? Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Notice what this is saying. It doesn't say understand everything and then trust. It says trust first, then he directs. Direction follows surrender, and sometimes we delay obedience because we're waiting for full clarity. But clarity often comes after we take that first step. Something that I think is important to note is obedience is not a transaction. It's an expression of trust. It's saying, God, I trust you enough to follow you, even if I don't see the whole picture. And that's what makes obedience powerful, because it shifts your focus from what will I get out of this to, God, I trust you in this. Let's look at Abraham. Hebrews 11:8 says, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out, not knowing where he was going. Think about that. He obeyed without knowing what the destination was. No map, no timeline, no guarantees. Just trust. And that kind of obedience is what positioned him for promise. But notice his obedience came before the outcome. Let's be honest about what kind of things make this hard. Fear of failure, fear of disappointment, fear of looking foolish, desire of control. We want assurance that things will work out before we step out. But if God showed you everything up front, it wouldn't require faith. Hebrews 11:6 reminds us, without faith, it is impossible to please Him. This is so important. Even when we don't see immediate results, obedience is never wasted. Every act of obedience builds your faith, strengthens your trust, deepens your relationship with God. Sometimes the fruit is visible, sometimes it's internal. But either way, God is working. Isaiah 55:11 says, "So shall my word be. It shall not return to me." That means when you obey what God has spoken, something is always happening, even if you cannot see it yet. One of the most freeing things you can do is to release the outcome. Because carrying the weight of results will exhaust you. But when you shift into obedience, you realize, I don't have to make this work. I don't have to do the most. I just have to follow. God is responsible for the outcome. You're responsible for the obedience. Obedience doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's sending the message God placed on your heart, stepping into something new, even when you feel unready, walking away from something that no longer aligns, saying yes when you're unsure, saying no when it's uncomfortable. Small acts of obedience carry great weight because they build a lifestyle of trust. Let's talk about the moments when obedience costs you something, because it will. It may cost comfort, it may cost approval, it may cost familiarity. But here's the perspective shift. What you gain in God through obedience will always outweigh what you lose in the process. Luke 9:24 says, "For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it." Obedience may feel like loss in the moment, but it leads to life. If God has been prompting you to do something and you've been hesitating because you're not quite sure how it will turn out, I want to encourage you to take this step. Not because you have all the answers, but because you trust the one who does. You don't need perfect clarity, you just need willingness. Your life will not be shaped by outcomes alone. It will be shaped by your obedience along the way. And one act of obedience can shift everything. Not because of what you did, but because of who you trusted. As you move forward today, carry this with you. You're not called to control the outcome, only to trust and obey. And this reminds me of a saying that I always used to hear. Charles Stanley quote when he was alive. And he would say, like, obey God and leave the consequences to him. And sometimes that's hard, but knowing that if you're in his will and doing what he tells you to do, he'll work it all out for your good and for his glory is helpful encouragement in those times. Until next time, friends, I'll see you soon. Thanks for listening to Purpose of Heart, the podcast, at www.purposeofheartpodcast.com. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. There's so much more God is doing, and I don't want you to miss a thing. Thank you in advance for the reviews and shares. They help this message reach more hearts. I can't wait to walk with you again in next week's episode. See you there.